In the ongoing war that Donald Trump started before his war in Iran, Donald Trump has lost again and lost big. Donald Trump's war on America's oldest university led to another loss for Donald Trump in court today, with a federal judge in Boston dismissing a Trump administration lawsuit against Harvard University for what Donald Trump's lawyers claimed was a violation by Harvard of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, a law that Donald Trump didn't care about in 1964 and has never cared about since. Judge Richard Stearns, appointed by President Bill Clinton, dismissed the case, saying the Trump complaint was, quote, devoid of any factual allegations. And so Harvard, once again, shamed Donald Trump in court and, in the process, unfortunately, shames some other universities like Columbia, Cornell, and Brown, who chose to negotiate with Donald Trump instead of fight his unconstitutional and illegal attempts to interfere in the operations of American universities. Every wartime president prior to Donald Trump has spent more time thinking about and often agonizing about the conduct of that war. New York Times reporter Maggie Haberman, who has been covering Donald Trump since long before Donald Trump began his political career, is now the co-author with Jonathan Swan of Regime Change, the nonfiction bestseller of the year, in which they describe the inner workings of the Trump White House and vividly capture what is on Donald Trump's mind. In an interview with Axios today, Maggie Haberman said that 70% of Donald Trump's mind share, as she put it, is on his building of his ballroom and his building other tributes to himself.
You would think that on the 17th day of the war that he would have maps of the Middle East or maps of, troop deployments. Who knows? What he's picks up these pictures and it's of maple trees. And he says, I'm choosing maple trees for the White House. I'm good at picking trees. So I'm paraphrasing here, but that's pretty much what he said. Under that were designs of the ballroom. And he starts talking to us about the columns and how some of the columns are, evocative of Rome. And then on the other side, the columns are evocative of Athens. And he's happy that they're a little bit either wider or more spaced apart or both than the columns in the Supreme Court. And that was like the first 15 minutes.
That was her description of the interview that she and Jonathan Swan had with Donald Trump for their book. And that interview was on, as she put it, the 17th day of Donald Trump's war in Iran, where he obviously didn't care much about that war, cared much more about the ballroom. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse was in the meeting today, as I just said, where the Trump supporters on the board of the Kennedy Center decided to name the area around the Kennedy Center the Donald J. Trump Plaza, a name that will be removed before long. And they think they've figured out a way to get Donald Trump's name engraved on the building, even after a federal judge ordered Donald Trump's name removed from the name of the Kennedy Center. Senator Whitehouse will join us later in this hour. And we have new disturbing news from Iran. Everything Donald Trump has said about when his war in Iran will end has been wrong or a deliberate lie. And now Iran is saying they might prolong the war through the rest of Donald Trump's presidency.
Is it Iran's objective to drag out this war, to maybe wait until Mr. Trump is out of office?
Look, we have to attain deterrence so that the enemy never dares to attack us, so we can live with security. One way is to prolong this war until we get to the next term of the presidency and cause attrition, so that if anyone else wants to attack Iran, they will know there is a cost.
So there's Iran's Revolutionary Guard saying they might choose to continue fighting Donald Trump for the rest of his presidency. No one has been more interested in Donald Trump's predictions, which turned out to be false, of when the war would end than the American military personnel fighting that war for Donald Trump. Imagine what it's like to be on an aircraft carrier in the longest deployment in the history of the United States Navy, with the commander-in-chief saying repeatedly for months that the war would be over in a matter of days, and each time that turns out to be false. Members of Congress are now demanding information about conditions on the aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln. MS Now's Priya Sridhar has exclusive reporting about a sailor who jumped off the USS Lincoln last week, and she shared that reporting with Ari Melber this evening.
This is a heartbreaking story. I exclusively spoke with a 19-year-old woman who is the spouse of a sailor who jumped off the USS Lincoln last Monday. She tells me that she was growing increasingly worried about some of the text messages that her husband had been sending her, expressing to her how exhausted he was working as an aircraft mechanic on that aircraft carrier's flight deck, and basically saying that he was hopeless because his deployment had been indefinitely extended. And she actually discovered that he had jumped off the ship, and she told me that he was in the water for about an hour until he was rescued and taken to the medical team on the ship. And she discovered all of that from one of his squadron mates. She repeatedly reached out to the Navy for more information and didn't hear anything from them until 5 days later. He's now been medically evacuated from the ship. He was brought to the U.S. Navy base in Djibouti and is currently on his way back to San Diego. But Ari, this really shines a spotlight on how this ongoing war in Iran is taking a mental toll on arguably the military's most valuable resource, our service members.
The military newspaper Stars and Stripes has this report about the Lincoln. The aircraft carrier left San Diego in November for a Pacific deployment, was redirected to the Middle East, and has now been deployed for more than 8 months, including a record-breaking number of days at sea without a port stop. Interviews with active duty sailors and family members, along with dozens of public social media comments and posts by crew members, describe sailors struggling with exhaustion and declining morale, including reports of suicidal thoughts in at least one instance where a crew member was prevented from jumping overboard. Stars and Stripes agreed to withhold the identities of spouses, family members, and active duty sailors interviewed for this story due to fears of reprisal. Family members and sailors say the roughly 5,000 service members aboard Lincoln have endured food and water shortages, disrupted mail service, and long work days with little time off. Lincoln has gone much of the deployment without the regular port calls that typically give carrier crews a break from life at sea. Carriers generally pull into a port every 30 to 45 days to allow for replenishment, maintenance, and crew rest. We've just been turning and burning the whole time we've deployed, said one sailor, noting that crew morale was high at the beginning of deployment, with expectations of port visits and other breaks. Nothing to really look forward to at this point, the sailor said, adding that crew morale now is so low that sailors and Marines aboard Lincoln would be willing to forego any upcoming stops in favor of returning home as soon as possible. All we want is a date home. Sailors aboard Lincoln separately described an incident in which a crew member was prevented from jumping from the ship. We already had an instance where watchstanders had to stop someone from jumping, one sailor said. The ship's crew was informed about the incident, which occurred a few months ago during a ship-wide announcement, sailors said. A Navy spokesperson said in a statement today, "We have not observed an increase in suicidal ideations aboard the ship. We take every service member's well-being seriously and have medical and mental health professionals available to assess and address concerns as they arise. Our medical professionals continually monitor for trends to ensure issues are identified and addressed early to protect patient privacy. We will not discuss individual service members or their medical information." Senator Richie Blumenthal, whose state of Connecticut includes an important submarine base, is demanding more information from Donald Trump's defense secretary, Pete Hegseth, saying the Lincoln's extended deployment raises broader questions about the Navy's ability to sustainably generate carrier forces while preserving service member well-being, maintenance schedules, fleet readiness, and the capacity to respond to future contingencies. There have been widespread reports of shortages of basic supplies, water contamination, plumbing issues, deteriorating mental health, deck safety concerns, and disruptions in the mail system, which have caused many care packages en route to the ship to be lost in transit for months. These reports warrant immediate attention, but they also raise a broader question whether the Navy can sustain the operational tempo now being demanded of its carrier force, particularly as this administration repeatedly commits U.S. forces to conflicts of its own choosing and increasingly relies on aircraft carriers to sustain those operations. The aircraft carrier George Washington, which is based in Japan, will now be sent to replace the Abraham Lincoln in Donald Trump's war. The Wall Street Journal reports the Washington's movement to the Middle East will leave a temporary void in the Pacific, where China has deployed its own aircraft carrier and is seeking to exert influence over its neighbors, analysts say. The carrier rotation also is raising concerns about the Navy's ability to respond to global events and sustain its operations long-term, officials and analysts say. The Navy has 11 active aircraft carriers which require maintenance when they return home. Due to the Iran war, it could take 3 years to get the fleet back to its ideal readiness posture, according to Clark. If you've got 2 or 3 carriers on each coast that are in various stages of needing to be repaired or maintained, they're going to be waiting in line. The United States Navy knows that they do not control the Strait of Hormuz, even though their commander-in-chief tells the lie almost every day that they do. A spokesperson for Iran's Central Military Command said the baseless claims made by the United States regarding the normal passage of vessels through the Strait of Hormuz are nothing more than lies and falsehoods. Imagine serving in the United States Navy in this war and hearing the other side accuse the commander-in-chief of lies and falsehoods.